T.
Okay, opening up.
James P.
Denise Street.
Closing door.
Joseph and both the C.
Okay, and closing.
So Connor, not here, something else.
Yeah, there's the other.
Yeah, so here I am the same as all. Connor O'Brien.
Connor and Martha. Yeah, year of birth.
Very cheap.
Does one of you mind thing?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, without further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to open his debate.
Oh, yeah, that's all right. Can I start? Okay. Mr. Speaker, what happens in the status quo is that most people in prisons are minorities. Why do they commit crimes? Because they feel that they're not accepted by the society and that society hates them. And society hates them even more because they commit crimes. What we are going to change here are the proportions of people in prisons. So we change proportions of people in prisons. Therefore, people hate minorities less, and minorities feel more accepted and commit less crimes. And I'll go further into my analysis in my speech. So what is our model? So first of all, as already the motion suggests, so the police departments would see ethnic composition of their district and then make arrests accordingly in proportion plus minus 20% in case of emergency, for example, if a lot of crimes were committed by minorities at the time. So if somebody is about to fail, so generally if there is another case of emergency where you have to break that limit, we let somebody of the, for example, if there, no thank you, if there is a person who committed a crime from the minorities and we need to, and there is already a quota limit, so we are letting go of the person who committed the smallest crime or the person who is about to end his sentence. And also, the most important one, it will be kept in secret from public. So it's a secret order to the police, which nobody is allowed to give to public anyhow. If they do, they'll be fined and they have a risk of leaving the society, like generally the police. Yes?
Is it important that we know like how many people are committing crimes, why they're committing crimes?
Well, of course. I mean, that's exactly my model. So I'm going to bring you why these people will commit less crimes, why it will lead to more acceptance of minorities in the society. So that's my first point. Less hate for people. So nowadays, as I told you, most crimes are committed by ethnic minorities. In America, most of prisons are filled with black people instead of white people, even though there are more white people in America than there are black people. So why is that important? So people generally don't really like immigrants, they don't really like minorities. Majorities are actually less likely to accept minorities at all. So they hate them even more when they see that those people fill prisons, because what tabloids tell them every day, what their friends tell them every day is that look at these minorities, look at these asylum seekers, look at these immigrants, look at them, they commit so many crimes, they make our society so much worse, we have to do something about them. And look how many proportions are filled in prison. And that's a problem, because that leads generally to more apolitical, like even in politics, more anti-minorities policies in a society. Why? Because politicians, they see that society generally hate immigrants. They understand that they can get some votes from going and campaigning against minorities, for example. So if they see if there is a mood in the society against them, they campaign for it, they run for elections, and then we get some seats in the parliament, which is not a very good thing for minorities, therefore. So we believe if we change this policy, we will change that idea generally. Because why? So first of all, no thank you. So as I told you before, people do not like minorities, right? So if there's less proportion of minorities in prison, there would be less reasons to hate these minorities in the future. So generally, there would be less tabloids that are saying, well, look at this, only 10% of our district are composed of minorities, but they fill 90% of prison in our district. Well, don't you think that it's because they commit much more crimes? No, there would be much less of this mood in the society generally. And therefore, there would be much less reason for people to hate it. And therefore, there would be much less reason for politicians to run with anti-minorities campaigns because they understand that's not the case. So, yes?
Do you plan on like arresting less minorities for crimes that they've committed, or like more like white people?
No, like generally we'll be just arresting people who committed crimes. So if somebody committed crimes in the police, we're going to arrest them. However, if we understand that people who are arrested, they are much more than the quota itself, even proportion plus minus 20%. If we understand that, we're going to let somebody out who committed either the least crime or he's about to leave anyway. So for example, he spent 10 years in prison and he was supposed to spend there like 10 years and a half. We'll let him go if there's some serious crime that's going on. So my second point, minorities will trust the society more, and therefore it will lead them to committing even less crimes. So why is that? Nowadays, minorities don't trust the society at all. So generally they feel oppressed, they feel repressed, they feel like the society doesn't accept them, they feel that the society doesn't like them, they feel that police is biased towards them, they feel that society will never ever be fair to them. So therefore, and they see that even more, they say, we're not committing more crimes than white people. However, for some reason, we all end up in prisons, and white people usually go away. Why does it happen? Well, probably because they have much more money than us, because they can pay for themselves, because they have a lot of friends who can bail them out, and we cannot do generally anything for ourselves. So we have to, we have to rot in prisons. But generally, if we change that policy, they will understand. They will trust our police system much more. Why will it happen? Because minorities will understand that, oh, they're not only them who end up in prison. They understand that there are much more white people living in districts than, for example, black people, and much more white people actually end up in prison than minorities themselves. And therefore, they'll get more trust to the police. They'll understand that the police is not biased towards them. They'll understand that it's not society hates them, that government doesn't hate them. It's generally everything gets much normal. And as I brought you before in my analysis, most of the crimes are committed because they don't feel accepted by society. They think that, well, if we commit some sort of crime, well, that's how it goes. And the society themselves is adding to it by saying, well, for example, not employing minorities groups, or for example, not accepting them in their own some groups or some organizations. So therefore, what I brought you today, now in my speech, so society hates them less, therefore they commit less crimes. Moreover, minorities feel that society hates them less. They get more trust to the government, and Lorenzo will further expand on that. They'll get more trust to the government, and therefore they will feel less need to commit crimes. What I told you today would be less crimes, less hate for minorities, more social integrity. So therefore, for all those reasons that I brought you today, I beg you to propose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker and call upon the leader of the opposition.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So the best way to stop racial discrimination in society is to stop discriminating on race. The best way to protect our streets is to arrest those we have a reasonable belief have committed crimes. And the best way to ensure that there's a good relationship between the state and the individuals in society is not to arrest people arbitrarily. Just a couple of clearing up points. I think that government have confused conviction with arrests. The conviction is something that's done in the courts by a judge who then gives a prison sentence. The motion was on the police arresting people presumably on the streets. Under their model, the arrests on the streets stay exactly the same, so their model doesn't correspond with the motion. I'll explain both why the motion as it's written and their model don't work for two main reasons. Firstly, it's going to lead to an increase in arbitrary convictions or arrests, which is an an uncontrolled restriction of the liberty of citizens, which has terrible consequences. And secondly, it leads to a less safe society. Some other points of rebuttal. We heard that this is going to stop there being a hatred of minorities. But what we're going to see under the motion as written is that minorities aren't arrested because we have a quota we need to fill. We've only arrested 10 white people today. That means we can't arrest more than 2 black people today. So that, there's a public perception that members of minorities aren't being arrested because of the colour of the skin, or under the model they're being let out of prison earlier than the courts have said so because of the colour of their skin, not because of anything they've done. So under this model, how are the majority going to feel about this? They're going to feel that the minority are getting a better deal. They're going to feel that the minority are actively undermining society and not being held to account. They're going to feel that they are being arbitrarily arrested so that real perpetrators of crime, they're being arbitrarily well held so the real perpetrators of crime can be done due to this quota system. This isn't going to reduce racial tensions. This is going to increase it to boiling point. We're going to see hatred for minorities. We're going to see public perceptions of minorities completely fall through the roof. And then the second point was on trust in the police system. And what we think is that a police system is trusted when they act reasonably and they act rationally. A court system is trusted when it seems to be getting the right result most of the time. But what's happening under this model is no longer are police thinking about what's reasonable to believe. No longer are courts or our prison services thinking about what is the right thing for society. And then instead they're thinking about the numbers that are on a piece of paper and having enough arrests, having enough in prison to make these numbers look the same. That's not what you want a justice system to do. That's not what citizens want a justice system to do from wherever they are. No, thank you. So there's 2 ways in which you can get this balancing act. The first is that you can arrest more people from the sections of society and imprison more people from the sections of society who are currently underrepresented in prison, or you can have those which are overrepresented being let out early or not arrested at all. And both of those have catastrophic results.
So,
yes.
Do you believe that the current insurance-style risk assessment that the police does, where they simply try to go to areas with more ethnic minorities because they think it's more likely that crime will happen there, and then because of that find more crime there because they go to look for it?
No, I don't think that's ideal, but I don't think, and the reason that's not ideal is because you're doing your police work based on ethnicity. But what happens on your side of the house is you make that explicit and you keep doing your police work based on ethnicity. That what you should really be doing is looking at reasonability, looking at trying to do your job rather than trying to boost stats in any extent, no matter what that metric is. So the increase of arbitrary arrest. So we think that liberty is a fundamental human right. We think there's enormous psychological harms when that is constrained. We think that the best theory of the state is there to maximise the public good without infringing on people's fundamental rights, other than when this is absolutely vital. We think that this is extremely important because the states which do this tend to be totalitarian. Life in those states is bad. You can't get a concrete self as your idea of yourself as a free actor, a person of moral worth, when you can be arbitrarily detained at any point so that a police commissioner, so that a judge can fill his quota for the month. We think life in these states is terrible. We think people are not fully developed. And so when members of minorities and members of any ethnic group which is currently underrepresented in prison suddenly is having their liberty restrained purely because the stats say so, that this is going to lead to them being disenfranchised with the state. It's going to lead to a hatred of the police force and a hatred of the over-offending, in their view, according to the government, minorities which have caused this to be a state of affairs. This is going to lead to less social cohesion and a downfall in society and a life in a society which is fundamentally worse, a life in a society where you've lost your right to your basic human rights. And this is going to have a special effect on minorities such as, say, Jews in North London, who typically have a lower offending rate than even the white majority. So there are certain minorities who also commit crimes less than other minorities. This isn't a majority-minority debate. And so what's happening in these sections is, let's say you have 20 Jewish people in North London, then every day you have to arrest one of them just to keep everything going. These sections of society are completely alienated. These problems are going to be completely in the forefront. So this actually makes life worse for minorities, not better. So the other way you can go is you can start letting people out of prison and you can start not arresting people on the streets. So firstly, one of the main reasons for punishment and what's fundamental about the criminal justice system is acts as a deterrent to committing crimes. That crimes rot the heart of society, they make social living impossible, and they ruin communities. And what a deterrent does is it gives you a strong incentive not to commit crimes. But then if you're from an ethnic group where you know that either your sentence is lower or you're unlikely to be arrested, then this deterrent completely goes. The street is less safe. Secondly, you have victims. The criminal justice system acts to give some solace to victims. You feel that justice has been done. But you don't when that person is not arrested. You don't when you feel they've not been convicted due to the colour of their skin. You don't when you see them out on the street after a week because the things don't match. And that's going to lead to people not trusting the state to fulfil them, not trusting the state to protect them, and people taking justice into their own hands. It's going to lead to a culture of vigilantism, which in this particular context isn't just going after an offender. This makes it a race war, because it's a culture of vigilantism against a whole section of society based on the colour of your skin that you feel that the police is not prosecuting properly. This is going to lead to a complete disintegration of society. It's going to lead to civil war. This is going to be absolutely terrible. Finally, a couple of comments on the perception of justice. You no longer trust the court service. You no longer trust the police to do their job of protecting you on the street. You lose faith in the state to protect your basic rights. You lose faith in the streets to be okay. It leads to factionalism and it leads to a disenfranchisement. And so for those reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you. On this side of the house, we think that ethnic minorities, often in neighborhoods, don't have the degree of social protection that their contrasting majority actually has, and therefore are more prone to actually have abuses perpetrated by the police forces because they don't have this sense of protection. In my speech, I will explain to you, first of all, why it leads to less abuses perpetrated by the police in general, which is a good thing, obviously, and second of all, why it creates a feeling of trust in the police, which leads to less tensions, and in turn to less ethnic crime. But first, I will firstly briefly clear up the model another little bit and bring 3 points of rebuttal. So, about the model. Okay, it works either way, where we were talking about arresting, not about prison sentences. In a sense, when the police arrest, often they do hold in contempt people that have been arrested, especially if they come from ethnic minorities that often have less access, for example, to amount of money, for example, to pay their bail, or to lawyers that can get them out of jail for the little crime that they committed in that moment and do get arrested. The thing is that minorities have less protections when they are on the street, and often the police, if they see a minor crime being committed by a person belonging to such an ethnic minority, have a greater incentive to be harsher towards them and carry out more arrests towards them because they know that they have less protection in that environment from around them, so less social protection in a way. So then my 3 points of rebuttal. So first of all, you say that it increases arbitrary arrests. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to solve. We will try to solve the problem of arbitrary arrests and decrease them. That's why we put that 20% of up and down, because we do realize that things are not always black and white, that you can't just say there are 40% of blacks and 60% of whites, therefore we need to have 40% of black arrests and 60% of white arrests. We do realize that often things aren't just that easy, and that there might be a way that you have to go up and down, or that you have to clear up on a case-by-case basis. But what it does to this policy is that when the police needs to arrest somebody and is down on the street and sees something happen, like for example, I don't know, a person drunk driving or something like that, they do understand, they know, they have in their mind, okay, I cannot just be harsher toward that minority because I know that they have no protection system. I have to treat them equally because there is this policy in place. So if I arrest 80% of my arrests today are black, and only like 2 people that are arrested today are white, even though obviously that's not balanced, well, I'm going to be in trouble. trouble, so we're going to think more about what we're doing. Second of all, it makes life worse for minorities. No, it creates a protection system from minorities against arbitrary arrests perpetrated by the police, and that's why it's a good thing. And third of all, the vigilante system against, and it's going to be only against one race. No, that's the whole point why we're keeping it secret, so that people in the wider public don't especially know about the existence of the policy, but we just see that there is a fair amount of arrests, that on a whole, it's not only black people getting arrested in that neighborhood, but it's more fairer, and things are going better because you create this fair system. That's why we don't think that there's actually going to lead to anything like a vigilante system. But on to my first point, why it leads to less abuses perpetrated by the police in general. So under the status quo, the police have a great deal of freedom in deciding who to arrest and when to arrest them and why to arrest them. And often, in neighborhoods, as I said before, minorities are viewed as more inclined to committing crimes, they have a less developed protection system, and therefore the police has, in a way, an incentive to actually carry out arrests towards them, because they know that A, they think that they're more inclined to committing more crimes, therefore, well, maybe it's better to arrest them, and second of all, they know that they're going to be getting less troubles if they arrest a black person, because maybe they're not going to get out on bail that easily, they're not going to have a better lawyer, and often we just don't have the developed protection systems that majorities have in neighborhoods with people in general, not enough. And obviously, under this model, the police have to make arrests in a more reasoned way. The thing is, we're not looking for a model, for a system in which the police is just going out in the morning thinking, I have to arrest 10 whites and 10 blacks today. No, they're going to go out in the street and think, okay, let's see what crime is being committed, and I know that I cannot just randomly arrest people because of the color of their skin, but I will actually have to think about the crime that they're committing, why they're committing it, and whether it's worth being arrested for. Therefore, actually thinking about what we're doing, and therefore leading to a more reasoned and a more fair arrest system. So in that way, we will have a disincentive to arrest only minorities. Whereas now we have a big incentive, because we're less protected. Under this system, you introduce a protection system also for minorities that makes sure that as a result, the police will just make a more reasoned way of arrest. We will just think, okay, also this white people is committing, as being drunk driving, well, maybe I can arrest him as well and take away his driving license, because that's also something worth doing, even if he's not belonging to the ethnic minority, and even if I know that tomorrow he's going to get out on bail, and maybe he has a really good lawyer that's going to, kick my ass later on in court, but at least it's a fair way to do, and I should do it. At least at the beginning, we're probably going to think I should do it, because otherwise I'm going to get in even bigger trouble because I'm only arresting black people. That's at the beginning. Obviously, with time, we're hoping that that sense of fairness will actually be ingrained into the police, which is now not the case. Yes, second half.
What caused the Ferguson protests, the London riots, and all of the various race riots that occurred throughout?
Yes, that's exactly my second point. We think that that was caused by ethnic tension created by a feeling of fear in ethnic minorities perpetrated by the police, because the police was carrying out all these arrests and they were acting in an unfair way towards minorities. Minorities felt threatened, and in turn, because they felt threatened, they started threatening the police as a result, which led to a vicious circle of the police and ethnic minorities being against each other and creating more tensions. And that's why I'm going to extend on my partner's point about why distrust in the police will actually lead to less tension and less ethnic crimes. As my partner said, this will lead to more trust in the police, because ethnic minorities will no longer feel like they're going down the street and they're being arrested just because they're walking down the street and maybe they don't have their ID with them, but they actually will feel protected, and they will feel that the police is treating them exactly like they treat any other person on that street in that neighborhood. That will mean that they will feel less threatened by the police, and in turn, they will threaten the police less, because that's what happens right now. Ethnic minorities, because they have this sense of being threatened by the police, that they can get arrested anytime, in turn, how they react is because they have no protection system, they turn against the police and they start threatening them, which creates a sense of fear and a sense of tension that eventually has developed into riots and into even greater tensions. Under our system, that will hopefully diminish, because they will have this sense of protection and will no longer feel threatened and will no longer threaten. So because it leads to less abuses, because it creates less tensions, I beg you to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from Open and Gov that this motion is designed to protect minorities, to reduce arrests and imprisonment based on racial stereotyping, and this will remove racism from the police force. Their motion does none of these things. In fact, it exacerbates it. This is one of the most dangerous motions for minorities and for racism. I have a few substantive points. The first is that it racializes arrests, and the second are the implications for society as a whole. Before that, we've got some points of rebuttal. The first point that the opening Gov brought us is that this isn't arbitrary at all. No, it's actually, we've got clear criteria. Well, yeah, but when you're working within stats, of course there's going to be an element of arbitrariness. So, for example, you have a population of 100 people. 90 of them are white, 90 are black, 10 are white. So the blacks are in the majority. Well, you've got 9 black people arrested, you've got 1 white person arrested. That is your stats. If you have then, say, 20 white people committing a crime, because of the way inverse racism works within police forces, and the argument that Open and Gov are actually bringing us, that people are more likely to arrest black people or minorities because of that sort of sense of racism, then what's going to happen is that, yes, you've got the plus minus 20%, but that doesn't cover all of the white people that have committed the crime, even though white people might be committing more crime, so they're just going to reduce the number of white people. And yes, they've given us the caveat, well, we'll be releasing the people that commit the least serious crimes. But seriousness is a totally discretionary, subjective point. Is it fraud more serious than theft? Is theft more serious than violence? Well, it depends on the victim and the victim's perspective. If we're going to go, it is entirely subjective. And who makes that decision? Well, the police are making that decision. So if the racism that Open and Gov tell us exists does actually exist, then they've got a problem, and that doesn't protect minorities. It just entrenches it. So it doesn't do anything to protect it. And then randomly arresting people. They say that that won't happen either. Well, yes, it will, because if you arrested 1 white person for a crime, now to make your stats work, you have to go and arrest 9 black people to make your stats look good. Even if 9 black people haven't really committed crimes worth being arrested for, they have to do that to make their stats work. So if anything, this just encourages arrests. No, thank you. They talk about vigilantism not happening, but it does happen. We all know this. People feel that they haven't had justice. They go and they punch you. You've slept with my girlfriend. I'm going to go and punch you. People do take things. That's a very minor example, but it does happen on a larger scale, particularly when you've got more serious crime. No, thank you. They say it's going to be a secret policy. Well, that just won't work, because arrests are very public, so the stats are publicly available. They have to be made publicly available by the government, and if it's not, well, that's insidious. That's very secretive, and you're going to have tabloids all over it when it does come out, and massive unrest. So moving on, no thank you. So moving on to my substantive point about racializing arrests. There is entrenched racism in the police force. We accept that. What this does is it doesn't stop that entrenched racism. So when a police officer arrests somebody unfairly, it goes to court, they don't get convicted, the courts stop that, because you have to have evidence, the courts stop that racial conviction. However, on their side of the house, the model stays exactly the same, because there's no incentive for police to stop racially arresting people on racist grounds. All they're being done is giving state-sanctioned authority to go and have a majority of black people arrested in comparison to a minority of white people, where you've got sort of ghettoization or something like that, a majority of black people. You have to arrest the majority of black people, even if white people are just as bad in committing crimes in those areas. But it's more complicated than that, because in large cities is where you have a larger concentration of crime. So you have a Greek population, you'll have a black population, you'll have a Turkish population, a white population. So then you have to make sure that your stats match up to all of those different groupings. And that then means that you have to go and arrest people just simply based on the fact that they might have been jaywalking or something, because you have to make your stats match, because you've got one group that's very high crime level, but you can't arrest more than like 5 of them, because they're only sort of that proportion in society. So you have to now go and arrest a whole load of Turkish people because the Greeks have committed a load of crimes to make your stats work. So that just encourages racism. It also means that the police force, no thank you, it means that the police force is viewed as being unfair. If you see that other people are getting away with crimes that you're not getting away with just because you're in the majority, that is inherently unfair. It's a breakdown of trust in the police force and a breakdown of all sorts of orders. So you need the police, 1, you report your crime, and 2, you cooperate when you've seen a crime has been committed. You're not likely to do any of those things if you feel that there is entrenched state-sanctioned racism or divide based on racism within the police force. More importantly, though, it entrenches the view in the police force to view arrests on racist grounds. So even if they don't then actually, even if the stats don't work out in terms of being arrested on racist grounds and it's not unfair, the police then start to view arrests on racist grounds. And police do much more than arrest. They're there to keep the peace, so in terms of riots, they can use force, whatever. And that then encourages them to use more force on certain groups rather than other groups, because they're not forced to see everybody as equal and based and judged on the crime. They're forced to see people along racial lines. No, thank you. So that is a problem. And that entrenches racism in society, because if the one group that is supposed to keep the peace, regardless of your race, gender, or religion, you're then going to be encouraged to view them on racial grounds. Take a POI now.
Under the status quo, the police already views one group as being more inclined to have no protection system, therefore it's easier to arrest them. Under our system,
thank you, yes. Yeah, no, I appreciate that that's the case. What your model does is it makes it worse, because you're encouraging the police to view people, to view crimes, not on the crimes they commit, but on their race, and have stats to fix up. So if you've got a majority group, they're going to necessarily be the victims, because they're going to be arrested based on their race, whereas somebody else who's committed a crime, but because your quote is full, is not going to get arrested or not going to go to jail. So then the implications for society. So what this does is entrenches the stereotypes. So you're more likely, if it's a minority black group, well, they're more likely to get away with the crime. They're not going to get arrested for what they've done. So that encourages hatred towards that group. And the tabloids will be all over it. This old little granny was knocked off her wheelchair by a black guy, but he wasn't arrested because the stats were too big. That is more insidious and more harmful than having false arrests, which don't lead to convictions. Much more damaging for the reputation of these groups. Moreover, it warps the statistics that come out of those populations. So it doesn't address the causes of crime or the causes of racism within the police force or within society. Crime is caused by poverty, by education, things like that. What this does, it makes it look like the police isn't racist, if these stats actually work, which they probably won't. But even if they do, it makes it look like the police is very fair, but that isn't the way that it works. You've still got this crime, it just isn't being reported. And you still have unfair arrests, they're just not being reported. And that has implications for wider society, because socio-beneficial policies are not going to be implemented, because there is no pressure on the government to do that, because the stats don't reflect the situation on the ground. Because it is harmful to minorities, and because it is harmful to development, society development as a whole, I beg you to oppose this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the floor. We have 2 points of extension on side of government today. First of all, we want to discuss the change of the mentality and how people operate under our new policy. This includes the police, this includes the presumably white majority, and ethnic minorities and their perception of each other within society. And second of all, I would like to speak about the long-term benefit of this policy. Before I get into that, I have 2 points of rebuttal. So, first of all, this policy goes, the way it works right now is that you do have an insurance-style assessment of the risk of where crime's going to happen by the police. The problem is, they see more crimes in poor jurisdictions, and unfortunately, most often, lower socioeconomic groups tend to be ethnic minorities. That means that the police link this image of minorities within those areas to the general populace of that ethnic minority, rather than the socioeconomic background that they come from. They link the crime, very much like first opposition, to their genetic code rather than their social background. We have yet to hear from the opposition how crime is exactly linked to an ethnicity rather than to your background, and how crime only happens within certain ethnic groups, because, Mr. Speaker, everybody commits crimes. Everyone can be found. Seriously, that's almost borderline abusive. The police can find crimes if they look for it. The police, if they look for it, can find crimes with all ethnic groups. Crime is not something inherent to an ethnic group. And the more you look for it, after you already have linked it to the, after you've already linked it to an ethnic group in your mind because of the statistics that are currently in existence, you look for it more within those groups. By looking for it more within those groups, you find it more within those groups. This leads to more ethnic minorities going to jail. But the problem is, this first of all reinforces that stereotype that already exists within the police force, but furthermore affects also the minorities in low crime areas that aren't actually committing that many more crimes than other ethnic groups within those areas. When, we believe that Jewish people in poor neighborhoods are just as likely to commit crimes as black people and white people within those areas, just because North London may be a richer area where where harsh crimes are generally less common and therefore less pursued already, doesn't mean that crime does not exist within Jews. No, thank you. But what we would rather have, the kind of the actual way we have is now there's going to be an actual risk assessment, the actual way it should happen. Because when we look at a jurisdiction where you have a low socioeconomic background of with 90% I don't know, Greeks and 10% Turks, then yes, 90% Greeks will go to jail and 10% Turks. But in the end of the day, no one will go free. It's more likely that they will arrest another shoplifting kid than that they will let an actual horrible murderer go free. We find that a lot more likely than what opening opposition has brought to you. No, thank you. But furthermore, this is more important even for the minorities in other areas that are affected by the large amounts of ethnic minorities and lower socioeconomic backgrounds that then get treated more harshly even when they're less likely to commit crimes in those wealthier areas where they are less likely to commit crime. So yeah, onto my constructive. No, not yet. So essentially, the change of mentality that we're going to see, first of all, in the police, is that they become more likely to actually look into crimes that are significant rather than arrest every shoplifting teenager they can catch, because they need to actually make sure that their quotas somehow make sense. They do need to stay within this statistical threshold. They will make it more likely that they will actually go out and look for significant crimes, and more importantly, they will also work more in crime prevention because these statistics bind them in the other way as well. It restricts them in a sense that they can't go out and arrest everyone they see. They will become more likely to actually want to prevent crime, to actually want to go out there and make sure that crimes do not happen in order, simply by their presence, making crime less likely to occur, patrolling more and being more present, thus limiting the amount of arrests they actually need to make. Yes?
Why do you want to introduce a motion that brings in a link between ethnic minorities and crime?
Because this is not what this policy does, Mr. Speaker. This is exactly the opposite. The police right now believes that there is a link between genealogy and ethnic crimes. We believe that if there's 90% of black people and 10% of white people, we believe the white people are as likely to commit crimes as the black people, just that there are 90% black people of the entire population. That means, yes, likely 9 out of 10 people that commit crimes will be black. Vice versa, if you have a population with 90% white people and 10% black people, we find it likely that 9 out of 10 criminals, if you don't discriminate against a racial minority, will actually be white of the criminals. How about that? So yes, furthermore, we do see that we will see that the police also will realize more and more that crime is not inherently linked to ethnic minorities. They will understand. They will receive more of an understanding by seeing that other groups, that other ethnic groups, including maybe their own ethnic groups, do commit crimes. The amount of crimes they see. Furthermore, it will cause white people to commit less crimes because now they're actually being scrutinized more heavily, because now they will actually be looked into. Even if the policy is unknown to them, in the long run they will see that the arrest numbers for white people over the years have gone up, and therefore it will become more likely and more apparent to them that they will be caught. The minorities won't necessarily see the police as this force of evil because they also see these numbers. They also start to see that the arrest numbers are changing, that the police is becoming more reasonable, and that the police is becoming less likely to shoot them for crossing the street. And to get quickly to my second point, the long-term benefit is essentially that the police, especially the police, will limit their focus on minorities. And by that, will actually change their mentality towards minorities in the sense that they will no longer see them as dangerous as they do right now, because the reason that they see minorities as these big boogeymen is because they are taught to see that minorities are supposedly more likely to commit crimes, and therefore they look after them, therefore they go after them, and therefore when they see a teenager with a hoodie crossing the street who may backmouth them, they think he's going to shoot them, and then they draw the gun a bit too quickly. So for these reasons, Mr. Speaker, we beg you to propose.
Mr. Speaker, the previous speaker tells you that there is a problem when the police try to associate ethnicity and the commission of crimes. He says that the relationship between the number of the proportion of ethnic minorities in a society and the proportion of those ethnic minorities that are being arrested should be exactly the same, right? We say he gives us absolutely no justification for why this should be proportionate, right? Any more so than the proportion of people on the socioeconomic spectrum should reflect the people who are being arrested. There's no reason that there should be just as many rich and poor people in prison, right? We can see that that's not true, right? It's because there are particular things that influence you to commit crimes. These are linked to socioeconomic status, right? And we think that so long as socioeconomic status is linked to ethnicity, right, which it is, Opening Gov gave us plenty of good reasons why it is, right? But I'll expand on them later on. Then we think that there will be a link between that and committing crimes, okay? Right, I'm going to talk to you about two things. The rest of my rebuttal will be interwoven, right? I'm going to talk to you firstly about why this motion would undermine the protection of the direct victims of crimes. I'm going to talk to you, particularly amongst ethnic minorities. I'm going to talk to you secondly about why the value of accurate information with regard to ethnicity and arrests in terms of solving discrimination and stuff like that. Okay. My first point, right? So they ought to tell us that there is a problem, right? Which is that the police just go to ethnic minorities' neighborhoods, right? And that in order to find criminals, right? As a result, there are disproportionate numbers of arrests of ethnic minorities, right? And there are cases that basically ethnic minorities need protection from the police, right? Whether it be discrimination or abuse, right? Okay. We say that what they get right here is a characterization of how this debate would pan out, right? Which we finally get because we didn't really get an accurate form of that from OG, right? Which is that you'd have fewer police going to Compton or Chirac or West Baltimore or whatever if you want to talk about the States or inner city Marseille or Paris if you want to talk about Europe, okay? Okay. We think that the instances where they say that people in these areas need protection from the police, right, are a small number of instances of police abuses. We say this is definitely a problem that's exacerbated on their side of the house, right? As Kelly indicated in a POI, right, the root cause of substantial numbers of riots is police brutality, right? But the thing is that police brutality happens, right, when there are far too few police in an area, so that they feel unsafe, right? For two reasons. Partly because police will always prioritise their own safety over the effectiveness of or fairness of their own policing. If they think they're going to die, they'll do whatever they can to make sure that other people are afraid of them and won't come at them because they will use excessive force, right? We think that that's something that's unavoidable. Okay. Secondly, it means that less experienced police don't have the same kind of supervision to ensure that they keep their discipline, right? We think that this is a problem when there are far too few police, right? Conversely, right? We think that when the number of police in Harlem was doubled in 2003, right? That's why we saw the number of crimes being committed seriously shoot down, right? Because they could actually create some kind of a positive rapport with the locals, right? Okay, right? But we think that under that grounds of trying to solve police brutality, we win that point, right? But moreover, right, we think that it's hugely important, right, that people from ethnic minorities get protection from actual criminals, right? We think that when there are fewer police in these particular areas, right, that there are a number of harms that come from this, right? Partly that these areas become less safe, right, because you lose the deterrent factor of just continued police presence, right? The kind of police that you can cooperate with and have some kind of a friendly relationship with, right? We think that when there's more police, there's less of an opportunity to commit crime crimes, like drug dealing and stuff like that, well, those kind of crimes like lead on to other crimes, as I'll talk to you about later on, right? Secondly, right, we think that it's an awful thing, right, that you get reduced justice, right, when you get, like, by definition, like, fewer arrests in areas where crimes are more likely to be committed, right? What happens as a result is that you don't vindicate, like, women who are raped, or even, like, under OG's proposal of, like, letting out, like lower offenders or people towards the end of their sentence, right? We think it's particularly bad when you're not vindicating people, like the guys who are beaten up by others, right? And like when you just let out like their like aggressors out of prison early, like just because it fits some kind of quota, right? We don't think that that's right either, right? Thirdly, right, and like worst of all, right, is that there's less trusted police to solve your problems, right? So like as a result, you need to solve them yourself, right? If the police aren't going to protect you, right, like from being assaulted by others, you're more likely to band together in other groups, like commonly known as gangs, right? Shocker, this is where gang violence comes from, right? To try and get some kind of protection for yourself, right? We say that it's not like a coincidence, right, that the Crips began as a vigilante group, right? Like in order to fight against like violence from like the Bloods, right? Like we think that this comes about when people don't feel safe because the police aren't protecting them. This is a problem when you have fewer police in areas where violence is more common, right? Also, like, just to deal with the stuff we got about, like, solving ethnic tensions and stuff like that, right? We think that there would be a huge degree of ethnic tension, right? When the majority, who are almost always represented, like, overwhelmingly in the establishment, whether in the police or in the government, like, are failing to protect ethnic minorities, right? We think that you're more likely to get tensions that way. I'll actually take a POI now.
Do you think that there will be less brutality when the police are actually becoming very threatening towards ethnic minorities? Do you think those ethnic minorities will not feel threatened and become more brutal?
Listen, I've already dealt with police brutality and why it happens less when you've got more police around, so that like the police can be like less threatening and feel less of a need to like assert themselves aggressively, right? I've dealt with that. Okay, my second point, right? The value of accurate information, right? Okay. So we think that like accurate information shows the actual causes of the disproportionate relationship between ethnicity and the likelihood of being arrested, right? So when OG tell us that it's just like people don't feel accepted so they commit crimes, right? We got no analysis as to why that is true, right? We think they did allude, however, to the reality, right? Which was two things, right? Firstly, like there are systemic problems in the structure of society, right? That like minorities are poorer due to job discrimination, right? This is like explained in great depth, like not even considered by OG, right? And like this is the link between ethnicity and the commission of crimes, right? That like that closing gov like really want, right? It's that like when you're poorer, you're more likely to commit crimes, right? Why? Because you're more likely to commit finance-based crimes, right? Like theft and dealing drugs, right? But then as a result, you're outside of the protection of the police, like so if someone comes to beat you up, you can't go and say, they beat me up and stole my drug money, right? So as a result, you start self-policing, right? You commit assault and murder and things like that, right? Also, you join gangs. I've already explained this, like why gang violence and rape as a result are particularly bad, right? This motion doesn't change any of this, right? But it hides the result, right? It also hides other things that are particularly bad, like laws that persecute like ethnic minorities, like the mandatory minimum sentencing for like possession of crack because it was a black person's drug that was recently repealed by Obama, right? But like we think that when like you hide all of this, right? But like when you create some kind of like an ethnic-based like quota of who can be arrested, right? Meaning that like you lose any kind of a possibility that these problems will actually be solved because you lose any kind of political capital. Like people are less likely to vote for Democrats who like support like redistributive taxes and stuff like that, the kinds of things that will actually solve these problems and solve crime in ethnic minority areas with ethnic minorities. These are all reasons why we move to oppose.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Opposition claims that crime is linked to ethnicity. We, on side proposition, claim no, this is not true. This is not ever true. Crime, especially the types of crime, are linked by socio-economic standards, which is why you see higher crime rates in poor neighborhoods, in poor jurisdictions, and lower crime rates in wealthier neighborhoods and wealthier jurisdictions. The problem is that in those jurisdictions especially, where you have, let's say, compositions of 90% white people and 10% black people, because there's a stigma of black people there, the police also, the police will focus on those 10% more than they should. And this is what we want to change, because we believe that it is not the color of your skin that dictates whether or not you're inclined to be a criminal or not. Before I go into my summation along 3 points of perception, justice, and ethnic tensions, and they're all interlinked, I have a few points of direct rebuttal to the previous speaker as well. Positive rapport with local and deterrence. Yes, as my colleague said, if there are less arrests to be made, if that is the outcome of this policy, then the police will have more resources free to actually do this deterrence and be there for those, to create a rapport. Further, they are also more likely not to be seen as the enemy. Under the status quo, the police are not friendly to minorities. They are hunting minorities more. This is why we've seen police violence in Ferguson and in Miami and in London and in Paris and in Brussels. We've seen that police haunt the minorities. The gang protection, yes, people will still commit crimes under our model, but the way the police function will lead that there will be more justice and a better perception of the police overall, because of what I'm going to explain to you in my summation. Now, first of all, perception. What's happening under the status quo? We've heard from the opening proposition that there's a cycle of stigma. How does this work? You have the idea that black people or people of an ethnic group commit crimes. Thereby, you're going to look at them as police force. You're going to see the petty things that they do. You're going to see that they spray paint graffiti and commit vandalism. And you're going to see that they do this and they do that, which means you are more likely to stop them on the streets and harass them. And this makes those ethnic minorities feel also for the worst, right? This leads to see that the majority that actually also commit crimes only see, listen, the police are focusing on this minority, therefore it must be only this minority that commits crimes, which is not the case. We've seen that, yes, it is true that when there is a difference in socioeconomic status, you might have a different type of crime being committed, right? If the majority of white people are rich, they are more likely to commit things like tax fraud and other white-collar crimes. Whereas black people that live in a poorer neighborhood, yes, are more likely to commit, let's say, shoplifting or, or vandalism in that way. They are not more likely to commit any crime at all otherwise. So what the bulk of our extension was is how you create actually more justice, nothing. Because the police focus now on this group, because they see and they get reinforced, listen, these people commit crimes, therefore we need to look for them, therefore we actually find the crimes, make sure that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes, they will find the crimes. How does this actually work? Police get blind to the crimes committed by white people. In New York City, there was an experiment conducted by a lawyer that actually did all the things that black people are inclined to get arrested for more, the things that I've listed before. And he was not, even though he was telling police officers in their face that he was committing a crime. They are focused on the minority. And by instituting this policy, that focus will change. And thereby, you will actually force the police to look for the crime and create more justice in that way. You do not create more vigilantes. You see that already in the status quo. You do not see someone who is being robbed or someone who has been committed fraud against, that if the police doesn't do that, therefore I will immediately go retaliate always. Now this sometimes happens, but then in and of itself, that also is a crime then committed by, let's say, the majority, a majority ethnic group, and that get persecuted. I'll take opening.
So even on your case, where race isn't causative of crime, it is correlative because of the poor economic status of certain minority groups. So given that, and given you're trying to level out arrests, would you rather arbitrarily arrest someone in a high economics area who's going to be white, or?
Thank you. No, there are not going to be arbitrary arrests on the level that opposition claim. Why? Because arrest rates are not the only rate of measurement for success of the police force. It is also the number of crimes being reported. It is also the number of convictions they get. And if they get just high arrests but no convictions, trust me, there will be political hell raised. Because then the police force are not doing their job. So we do not think you will see arbitrary arrests. What we do think is indeed, like first proposition said, maybe some petty crimes go unpunished. Maybe the black kid that's just jaywalking will not get arrested. That is fine by us. So how does this then loosen ethnic tensions? Simply by creating more trust. They see the majority will have a perception change saying, okay, white people also commit crimes. Okay, they commit crimes, we commit crimes. We are all human beings. And it's not just assigning the blame on a minority which exacerbates the perception of the majority and of the police force by extension. So the ethnic tension we see is less likely to lead to the civil war that proposition claimed, because the civil war is already happening under status quo, which is why we had riots in Paris, in London, and in Ferguson at the moment. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker and call upon the opposition whip to conclude this debate.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what the proposition today are here to say is that they want to solve all of the issues that affect minorities, within lower class areas who are constantly being abused by the police and being unfairly arrested. And they tell you that this motion will suddenly lead to less minorities being in prison, and that the minorities will be oh, we're cool with the police system now because they don't abuse us anymore, and that basically we're going to have some sort of, oh no, time is up, sugar. We're gonna somehow manage to lose basically all these. Thank you very much. Can I use the timer? Basically, we're going to lose all of the terrible things that currently happen in the system. We basically say in opposition that not only do they not actually solve for any of these things, they actually make them quite a bit worse. But firstly, just one piece of extraneous rebuttal. Firstly, the last speaker told us that well, white people do also commit crimes. They commit white collar crimes. But they didn't actually quite explain to us why is it so important that we do focus more on white collar crime and try to let gang crimes, no thank you, and violent crimes within these type of areas go away just so we can focus on white crimes. And they didn't explain to us why greater police presence in particular white areas might necessarily lead to more arrests of white people, because we see the problem police, one of the root problems is the fact that the police are vastly more white, and that they have less bias against white people, so they didn't really explain that to us. But firstly, on to the 2 points of clash. Firstly, how this impacts directly the minorities that the proposition has been focusing on, and secondly, how this impacts wider society and the way that we actually help minorities or whatever. So firstly, proposition have told us that well, there's going to be a lot less minorities in prison. They're going to be less unhappy, and therefore they're going to commit less crime. Police are going to be less likely to abuse minorities because it's not so easy to arrest minorities anymore, and then because there won't be as much of a focus on us. Firstly, as we've spoken about, what about the arbitrary arrests that will occur under this motion? Because as we've been told, yeah, we might have to arrest white people for less serious crimes or whatever, just to make up this number of crimes that they're meant to be arrested for. But we're also going to apparently let go of some people. Now, who is going to be let go of after the arrest? We think that white people are a lot more likely to be let go of because all of the things that currently exist where like there is a bias against black people, and the white collar crime that like the back half have talked about so much, well, we think that like actually you're a lot more likely to be let go of for like something like that, because that's not viewed as like serious versus like the crimes that like minorities generally tend to be involved in because of the bias that currently exists. They don't actually solve that. The abuse that we're meant to be like suddenly removing, like still like police brutality and like the negative treatment of minorities is still going to exist when they're arrested. They don't solve for that, but just now there's like a lot less police presence in like these smaller these minority areas, because what is the point of having police presence like if you can't arrest people for committing crimes? So now that no thank you, because there's going to be less like police in these areas, they're going to feel, as Connor said, like they need to like make sure that they assert themselves, that they use force against these minorities. They haven't solved for that and haven't told us why that's any better. No thank you. Like also, like not once has anyone on the proposition mentioned the victims of crimes. They haven't once dealt with like how a victim feels when like they've been like attacked or whatever, but the person who like seriously harmed them has been let go of, no thank you, based on like a quota. Like we think that like people in these minority areas, like the victims in these minority areas are like some of the like most vulnerable people in society. We think that like, no thank you, like African American women and like young people are some of the most vulnerable people in society. Like not only at the moment in status quo that there seems to be a lack of representation for them, like within the police force, you're making it even worse because there's less police patrolling these areas, because you're saying that like, no thank you, yes, the crimes that were committed against you, like the crimes that were committed against you, well, like we don't think they're that important because we're going to try and fill a quota, and we're not actually going to get like, no thank you, we're not actually going to like attack we're not going to deal with the perpetrator of this crime. No thank you. We think that this leads to like far greater mistrust of the police, of a police system that doesn't care about justice, it just cares about looking good in like numbers and statistics. No thank you, it doesn't actually like deal with real crime. But also, like as Connor's talked about, we think this leads to like even greater self-policing, because if the police aren't helping you, who is going to help you? If you're a vulnerable young black woman and you think that like if like you're raped that it's not going to be seriously dealt with because the police don't focus on your area, no thank you, you're going to turn to like the gangs in your area, you're going to turn to them for help and protection because you can't rely on the police in any way, shape, or form because they want to fill like some numbers. And like also, no thank you, like just like this idea that there'll be less focus on minorities and that like people will be less likely to associate minorities with like crime and stuff. Like we think that like even though like first prop kind of said that like this won't get out, like we think it will instantly get out when suddenly like there's a lot less black people being arrested, like or there's suddenly a lot more white people being arrested. But like what is like wider society going to think? They're going to think, well look, these black people are getting away with the crimes that they were previously committing. I'll take you in a second. They're getting away with the crimes that they were previously committing just because of some quotas. Like why is that fair, and why should the majority shoulder the burden and be in prison? Yeah, go for it.
Okay, at the moment the police arrest black people also for jaywalking. Don't you think if they have a quota, we're mainly going to arrest rapists rather than just kids who shoplifted a CD on a shop?
Okay, cool. It hasn't been brought to us by the proposition if there's actually going to be less arrests of black people and those sorts of things, because like not necessarily there might just be like a lot more arrests of white people as opposed to that. But like secondly, like yes, like people who might be arrested for like jaywalking, we generally don't think that they get like life like imprisonment. Like we think it's a lot more important to have like people policing an area to deal with serious crimes, because as you fail to notice, there's just no police in the area to deal with the serious crimes because they can't actually arrest. Like secondly, how this impacts like wider society. Like we've been told that like, well, there's going to be like less focus on crime, but as Connor's on minority crime, but as Connor's actually taught you like the importance of accurate information. Like firstly, like why are crimes more likely to happen amongst minorities? It's because of like social problems. It's because of the horrible way that the system has treated them. But now, because we've turned around and said that's not an issue anymore, like look at the statistics, crime isn't more likely to happen in these areas. We don't look at the root causes anymore. We're basically like doctoring it and say, look, there isn't that much of a problem anymore. Even now, like reasonable people will look at these statistics and say, well, look, there's hardships in these areas. They suffer from poverty. They suffer from systems kept them down. But now, look, they don't suffer from that anymore. Crime isn't like more likely to happen because on a national scale, there's less arrests in these areas. Like this makes like the white majority think, well, look, we don't need to help out there. We don't have to change anything for these people because there doesn't seem to be any problem anymore. Like on the face of it, there's less crime in these areas, even though that crime is still existing. So we beg you to oppose. Thank you very much.